A Marine sniper? Your mother. Mr. Davies chuckled, a smug, condescending sound that filled the stuffy classroom. Honey, the only thing your mother shoots is bargain prices at the mall. The class erupted in a wave of cruel, sycophantic laughter. The sound washed over 15-year-old Maya Morgan, making her feel small, invisible, and hot with a shame that wasn't hers to bear. She shrank in her plastic chair, her gaze falling to the worn textbook on her desk. She had only answered his question. During the school's annual Career Day introduction, he'd gone around the room, asking students what their parents did, his tone dripping with the bored cynicism of a man who believed he'd heard it all. When it was her turn, she had spoken the simple truth, a fact she carried with a quiet, profound pride. My mom was a gunnery sergeant in the Marine Corps, she'd said softly. She was a scout sniper, but Mr. Davies, a man whose entire worldview was built on a scaffolding of cheap assumptions and intellectual arrogance, saw only the PDA mom who dropped Maya off in a sensible sedan. He saw the woman who baked cookies for the fundraiser and volunteered in the library. He could not reconcile that image with the one his student presented. In his mind, a warrior looked a certain way, and Sarah Morgan did not fit the mold. The laughter finally subsided, but the silence that followed was just as heavy. Maya felt the pitying glances of a few classmates and the lingering smirks of others. Mr. Davies moved on, his lesson on institutional arrogance now complete, though he was its sole practitioner. Under the lip of her desk, Maya pulled out her phone. Her fingers, trembling slightly, typed a short message to her mother, who was scheduled to be the last presenter of the day. He doesn't believe you. They're all laughing. The reply came back in less than a minute, a testament to a discipline Maya had always known but never fully understood. It was 2 words, a confirmation that the message was received and the situation was being processed with an unnerving calm. Understood. The injustice of the moment settled like dust in the air, a fine powder of humiliation coating every surface of the room. Mr. Davies continued his lecture, blissfully unaware that he had just armed a silent weapon of his own undoing. His prejudice was a form of intellectual laziness, a shortcut his mind took to categorize the world into neat, manageable boxes. A quiet, unassuming woman like Sarah Morgan belonged in the suburban mom box, a place of bake sales and carpools, not of windage, elevation, and the cold, hard calculus of a long-distance shot. He pontificated about the importance of critical thinking, of looking beyond the surface, all while demonstrating a complete inability to do so himself. Maya listened, the teacher's voice a meaningless drone against the roaring in her ears. She knew her mother. She knew the stillness that could come over her, a placid surface on a deep and dangerous lake. She knew the way her mother's eyes would scan a horizon, not just seeing, but observing, cataloging, assessing. She had seen the worn, oiled leather of the rifle sling in the locked case in the study, and the single, pristine bullet encased in acrylic on her mother's desk, a memento from a time and place Maya could only imagine. The other parents who presented that day were what Mr. Davies expected: a banker who spoke of interest rates, a lawyer who droned on about torts, a software developer who clicked through a PowerPoint of incomprehensible code. Each fit neatly into their designated box. The classroom grew warm, the students drowsy. The anticipation of Maya's mother's arrival was now a private, tense affair, a secret held between a daughter and the 2 words on her phone screen. The teacher's casual cruelty had turned the mundane event into a proving ground. He thought he was teaching a class, but he was about to become the lesson. The final bell of the period rang, signaling the last presentation. The classroom door opened not with a bang, but with a quiet, almost imperceptible swing. Sarah Morgan stood in the doorway, and her presence was an exercise in contradictions. She wore simple gray slacks and a plain blue blouse, the very picture of unassuming motherhood. There was nothing in her attire to suggest a past shrouded in secrecy and honed by relentless discipline. Yet, she moved with an economy of motion that was anything but ordinary. Her steps were silent, her posture perfectly aligned, a subtle testament to a body trained to carry heavy loads over impossible distances. She carried a long, heavy-looking case, its black polymer shell scarred with the marks of travel. She gave a slight, polite nod to Mr. Davies, her expression unreadable, a calm mask that betrayed nothing. "Ah, Mrs. Morgan," he said, his voice still laced with a patronizing warmth. "So glad you could make it. Come to tell us all about home economics." A few students snickered, the last echoes of their earlier cruelty. Sarah offered no reply. Her silence was not passive, it was active, a void that absorbed his sarcasm and gave nothing back. She walked to the front of the room, placing the heavy case on the teacher's desk with a solid, definitive thud that seemed to momentarily suck the air out of the room. Her hands, steady and sure, moved to the latches. There were 4 of them, heavy-duty clasps designed to withstand extreme pressure. She did not fumble or hesitate. Her fingers moved with a practiced, rhythmic efficiency. Click. The first latch sprang open. Click. The second. Click. The third. The sound was crisp, mechanical, and utterly alien in the quiet classroom. It was the sound of a professional preparing her tools. Every eye was fixed on that case. The students, who had been seconds from sleep, were now bolt upright, a current of genuine suspense electrifying the room. Mr. Davies stood with his arms crossed, a smirk still playing on his lips, but a flicker of uncertainty had entered his eyes. He had expected a pie chart, perhaps a photo album of family vacations. He was not prepared for this. The final latch clicked open, louder than the rest in the now deafening silence. Sarah Morgan lifted the lid. There was a collective, sharp intake of breath. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was not a collection of baking supplies or PDA flyers. It was an M210 enhanced sniper rifle. It was a thing of brutal, functional beauty. Its matte black finish seemed to drink the fluorescent light of the classroom. The massive scope, the custom stock, the heavy barrel, it was unmistakably real, a tool of immense power and precision. Sarah's hands moved over the weapon with a familiarity that was both intimate and chillingly detached. She lifted it from the case, the motion fluid and effortless despite its weight. She held it not as a prop, but as an extension of herself. With a series of swift, precise movements, she pulled back the bolt, visually and physically inspected the chamber to confirm it was empty, and then let the bolt slide home with a solid, metallic clack. The sound was an exclamation point at the end of a sentence no one had yet dared to speak. The room was frozen. The arrogance had evaporated from Mr. Davies' face, replaced by a pale mask of shock and disbelief. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked from the rifle to the calm, quiet woman holding it, and his entire reality began to crumble. That's a prop," he finally stammered, his voice a weak, desperate whisper. "It has to be a prop." Sarah didn't answer him. She didn't even look at him. She simply held the rifle, her stance perfectly balanced, her gaze distant, as if she were looking at something 1,000 yards away. From the back of the room, a figure rose. He had been sitting quietly through all the presentations, an observer in a crisp Air Force uniform. It was Colonel Jackson, a respected officer from the nearby base, present as a guest liaison for career day. He was a man whose presence commanded immediate respect, his face a roadmap of experience and quiet authority. He had seen the rifle, but more than that, he had seen the woman. He had seen the way she moved, the perfect economy of her actions, the unwavering discipline in her posture. It was a language he understood better than words, a signature of an elite fraternity few ever joined. He began to walk toward the front of the room, his polished shoes making no sound on the linoleum floor. The students parted for him like the Red Sea, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. He stopped a few feet from Sarah Morgan, his gaze not on the weapon, but on her face. He studied her for a long moment, a flicker of recognition, of profound respect, dawning in his eyes. He didn't need to see a personnel file. He didn't need a confirmation. He was looking at a living legend. He cleared his throat, and his voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it filled the room with an undeniable finality. "Gunnery Sergeant Morgan," he said, the title cutting through the tension like a knife. "I thought that was you." The use of her rank, formal and precise, was a thunderclap in the silent room. Maya's head snapped up, a tear of vindication tracing a path down her cheek. Mr. Davies looked as if he had been struck. Sarah finally shifted her gaze from the far wall, her eyes meeting the colonel's. For the first time, a flicker of something, not emotion, but acknowledgement, crossed her face. She gave him a short, sharp nod. "Sir." Colonel Jackson held her gaze for another moment before turning to face the stunned classroom, his eyes settling on the pale, trembling form of Mr. Davies. The colonel's expression was hard, his disappointment palpable. "Mr. Davies," he began, his voice low and dangerous, "you made an assumption today. You assumed that courage, skill, and lethality come in a particular package. A loud one. An obvious 1 inch." He gestured towards Sarah Morgan. "This woman, this PDA mom, is Gunnery Sergeant Sarah Morgan. She was attached to MARSOC. For the civilians in the room, that's Marine Corps Forces Special Operations Command. We're talking about the 1% of the 1%, he paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The students were mesmerized, hanging on his every syllable. "I was a forward air controller in Afghanistan. I saw a file once on a sniper team that was holding a position in the Karangal Valley. They were compromised, taking heavy fire, and their spotter was down. The sniper held that position alone for 36 hours, eliminating threats from over 1,200 meters, until relief could arrive. She saved an entire platoon that day." He looked directly at Mr. Davies. "The call sign for that sniper was Spectre. Her shot on a high-value target in Kandahar is still used as a case study in advanced marksmanship courses at Quantico. She is a recipient of the Navy Cross." He turned back to Sarah, his entire demeanor shifting from anger to one of profound, almost reverent respect. He drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight, and executed a perfect, formal salute. The gesture was a silent, powerful rebuke to every snicker, every doubt, every ignorant assumption that had filled the room. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with sincerity, "it is an honor to be in your presence." The story of what happened in that third-period social studies class became the stuff of legend. It spread through the school not like a rumor, but like a shockwave. It traveled from classroom to cafeteria, from the students to the faculty, from the principal's office to the district superintendent. By the end of the day, every person at Northwood High knew the name Gunnery Sergeant Sarah Morgan. The tale was retold with increasing embellishment. The rifle became bigger, the colonel's speech more dramatic, Mr. Davies' humiliation more complete. But the core of it, the undeniable truth, remained. A quiet professional had silenced a loudmouthed fool without raising her voice. The narrative then leaped from the school grounds, carried home by hundreds of students, and from there, it found its way onto the internet. It lit up military forums and veterans' social media groups. Photos of Sarah, dug up from old articles about female Marines, began to circulate. She became a symbol, an avatar of quiet competence, a perfect refutation of the stereotype she had so calmly dismantled. For Mr. Davies, the experience was a public and deeply personal reckoning. He didn't get fired. Colonel Jackson saw to it that he wouldn't. Instead, he had to live with his mistake in the very environment where he had made it. The next day, he found Sarah and Maya as they were leaving school. He was a changed man. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, genuine humility. He stammered an apology, his words clumsy but sincere, not just for the insult, but for the blindness of his prejudice. He apologized for his failure as an educator, for teaching a lesson in arrogance instead of one in respect. Sarah listened, her expression as calm and unreadable as ever. When he was finished, she simply nodded. "Everyone makes assumptions, Mr. Davies," she said, her voice even. "The lesson isn't in avoiding them. It's in what you do after you're proven wrong." That single event subtly altered the school's cultural landscape. The students had witnessed a real-world lesson more powerful than anything in their textbooks. They had seen arrogance shattered by truth, and they had seen that true strength didn't need to announce itself. A new kind of respect began to permeate the hallways, a respect for the quiet ones, for the people whose stories weren't immediately obvious. A small, symbolic artifact of the day soon appeared. Someone, a student likely, had used a marker to write Morgan's perch on the ceiling tile above the back row of Mr. Davies' classroom. The name stuck. It became a point of honor to sit there. Later that week, Maya quietly pinned a small, faded photograph to the classroom's wall of Heroes bulletin board. It showed a much younger Sarah, her face smudged with camouflage paint, a faint, weary smile on her lips, standing with her unit in some dusty, sun-bleached landscape. Mr. Davies, without a word, moved the photo to the very center of the board. He had learned his lesson. He understood now that heroes didn't always wear capes or announce their presence with thunder. Sometimes, They wore simple blue blouses and spoke in a quiet, steady voice. Sometimes, the most profound strength was the strength that had nothing to prove, because its actions had already spoken with more clarity and finality than words ever could. The quiet professional had left her mark, not with a bullet, but with a lesson in humility that would echo through those halls for years to come. A year passed. Career Day returned to Northwood High. In the same third-period social studies class, Mr. Davies stood before a new group of students. He was a different teacher now, his lessons infused with a wisdom born from his own public humbling. Before introducing the first guest speaker, he paused, his eyes drifting toward the back of the room, toward Morgan's perch, and then to the photo in the center of the bulletin board. "Before we begin," he said, his voice quiet and earnest, "I want to tell you a story about a mistake I made in this very room. A story about a student, her mother, and a lesson about assumptions." He told them everything, leaving out none of his own foolishness. He spoke of his arrogance and the quiet, devastating competence that had corrected it. The story had become institutional folklore, a foundational myth for the school, a cautionary tale passed down to each new class. It was his penance, and his most effective teaching tool. Maya was no longer the girl who shrank in her seat. She carried herself with a calm confidence, a reflection of the quiet strength she had seen modeled so powerfully. She didn't boast or tell her mother's story to everyone she met. She didn't have to. She simply embodied its lesson. She became a mentor to younger students, a defender of the quiet and the overlooked, an advocate for looking deeper than the surface. Her mother's legacy was not just in her past actions, but in the present character of her daughter. True legacy, the narrator might say, is not a list of accomplishments etched onto a plaque or a collection of medals stored in a box. It is not a story told in a loud voice, demanding attention and applause. True legacy is the standard that continues forward long after you are gone. It is the quiet discipline that inspires others, the silent competence that becomes the new benchmark for excellence. It is the steady hand that proves more than a boastful mouth ever could. Sarah Morgan never sought validation. She never asked for respect. She simply was who she was, and in doing so, she forced the world around her to rise to her level. She taught an entire community that the most powerful statements are often made in silence, and that the deepest strength is the one that feels no need to prove itself. Her legend was not about the rifle in the case. It was about the character of the woman who carried it. It was a testament to the enduring power of the quiet professional, a reminder that true worth is measured not in words, but in deeds, and that respect is a currency earned only through the undeniable evidence of one's actions. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud ignorance, and where silent strength defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.